Welcome to the fifth hearing of the Committee's inquiry into public toilets. I acknowledge the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, the traditional custodians on the lands on which we're meeting today. I pay my respects to elders past and present and celebrate the diversity of Aboriginal peoples and their ongoing cultures and connections to the lands and waters of New South Wales. I also acknowledge and pay my respects to any Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people joining us today. My name's Dr. Amanda Conn and I'm Chair of the inquiry. I ask everyone in the room to please turn their mobile phones to silent. Parliamentary privilege applies to witnesses in relation to the evidence they give today. However, it does not apply to what witnesses say outside of the hearing. I urge witnesses to be careful about making comments to the media or to others after completing their evidence. In addition, the Legislative Council has adopted rules to provide procedural fairness for inquiry participants. I encourage committee members and witnesses to be mindful of these procedures. Welcome and thank you for making time to give evidence today. And I'll also note that we have a couple of our committee members attending remotely via video conference today, and if they have questions, they'll appear on the screen in front of you. Could you please start by stating your name and position title and swear either the oath or the affirmation?
Sure. My name is Dr. Stephen Connerty. I'm Director of the Environmental Health Branch in Health Protection New South Wales, which is part of the Public Health Division within the Ministry of Health. And I solemnly, sincerely and truly declare and affirm that the evidence now about to be given by me shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth.
Thank you. Would you like to start by making a short opening statement?
No, I don't have a prepared opening statement.
No problem. I'll start with a couple of questions from myself and we'll go to other committee members. As I'm sure you've been following with this inquiry, there's been significant discussion around kind of the right to sanitation. I was hoping you could talk us through, I suppose, what the health implications are if those needs are not met. What are the public health implications of inadequate provision of toilets in public spaces?
If I interpret the question correctly, so if we have got too few public toilets, I assume that people will go to the toilet elsewhere, and so they may not be, or they may not go out. And so I think generally from a public health point of view, that would have consequences for, particularly for physical activity, which is a very important priority for New South Wales Health, and so that would be a disincentive for people to go out and about, and also to enjoy life generally.
Thank you. Certainly that fits with a lot of the evidence that we've already received. I'm also interested from a public health perspective, I suppose, in the from an infectious diseases perspective. We've heard things, I suppose, because there's no legislation or regulation of the way that toilets must be provided, for example, of some facilities not providing soap as a cost-cutting measure, or providing what users see as inadequate cleaning schedules and that sort of thing. So I suppose what are the risks when this isn't done correctly from an infectious disease point of view?
Well, most people that are using public toilets are probably well, so that would provide some degree of protection, I suppose, for people who subsequently use the public toilet. So it's different to environments where there may be concentrations of people who are less well. So there would be probably, which may include hospital environments, for example. I think that there are obviously guidelines around hand washing and what should be done to prevent a cross-infection from one person to another. And they are easily found, and they are included or incorporated, for example, in the Infection Control Manual that is produced by the Clinical Excellence Commission. And that's just obviously a very high priority within our hospitals. Now, I guess the same standard should generally apply to public toilets to try to prevent cross-infection from one user to the next. And so that would require elements such as a hand basin, soap, running water, and something to dry your hands with. Because normally those are the required elements to ensure that there is cross-infection is minimised. Also, you would need to have proper provision of toilet paper and ability to flush a toilet. So there's lots of functional characteristics that you would expect of a public toilet to prevent infection from one user to the next. So, yeah, I think that's... But in terms of what would be the burden of infection, for example, from public toilets, I don't think we have, or at least I'm not aware of, evidence around that. We don't have much in the way of local evidence because we don't have an effective means of collecting information. Most of the common gastrointestinal infections are not notifiable. There are some exceptions, so probably the most common bacterial infection, Campylobacter, is notifiable, but there is no mechanism that we have for identifying, public toilets as the source, for example. So generally speaking, we have the main method that we have of locating or finding a location that may have been the source of infection is through some sort of active follow-up. So that is resource intensive, and most of that work that is done by public health units. So, for example, cryptosporidiosis, which is notifiable disease, if we do a follow-up and we find that there are several people that are reporting that they attended a public swimming pool, then that may give us sufficient evidence to act, to get back to the owner of that public swimming pool to ensure that they might take an action, such as superchlorination. We don't have that evidence for public toilets, so we don't really have... It's very difficult to estimate how important they would be. So it's... they are not a place where we get congregations of people. So generally in places where we have many people grouped together, then there is a higher probability of infection from one person to another. So that's why we are concerned about institutions, and we have specific notification requirements for aged care facilities and other institutions where there are large groupings of people. So we don't have any specific provisions that are really shed light on how important public toilets may be. We have got isolated case reports that have occurred in the literature, so I'm aware of some of those, but I think they only really come to light when there is, it involves a particular organism that is notifiable. So I noticed in the literature, just having a quick look recently, that there was one of the outbreaks that is cited is an outbreak of hepatitis A. Hepatitis A is notifiable in New South Wales, but essentially has ceased to become an endemic infection. So we don't see any hepatitis A anymore, so we don't have an opportunity to see those clusters of disease that may be then linked back to a particular location. So my own view, which is that there is probably not a great deal of infection that is associated with public toilets, at least in my experience as a public health physician and working in public health units, is that it is uncommon for any notifiable disease to be attributed to a public toilet facility. So I think in terms of ranking in any particular order, the sort of settings or places where I would certainly put aged care facilities, childcare centres, and other places like that that are conducive to transmission of infection because there are large numbers of people or children together as more important places to than public toilets.
Thank you. That's helpful. We've also had significant discussion around design and materials used in public toilets, and you've already listed, I suppose, those what you see as the minimum items to be provided in terms of design. But in terms of materials and ease of cleaning and risk of infection transmission, do you have any particular views on materials that should be used or shouldn't be used in the design and construction?
I hesitate to offer an opinion just because my expertise is not particularly in infection control or cleaning. However, I would think that some of the things that may be relevant would be impervious surfaces, so surfaces that are cleanable, so surfaces where there are cracks, crevices, or wear in a particular way, so that there are places where bacteria and organisms and dirt and other things can remain, would be discouraged in the construction of a public toilet. Apart from that, I would not venture an opinion, and I would probably have to take on notice any other specific consideration about a design.
Thank you. You're very welcome to take that on notice and consult with your colleagues. I have one last question from myself, which I imagine you're going to take on notice as well, specifically in regards to the Western Sydney Local Health District Healthy Places program. It's been mentioned to this committee that they were looking at public toilet access as part of their work improving health through urban environments. Are you aware of any of the details of that work?
Only very generally. So I think it's a very useful initiative. I don't know exactly what they've examined. I am familiar with some of the personnel that work in both health protection and health promotion in Western Sydney, and I think it just underlines the fact that New South Wales Health is very interested in ways of promoting physical activity, particularly for older adults, because that is very important for health, and they've obviously identified this as a particular barrier, and if they're working collaboratively with Blacktown Council, I think that's excellent.
Thank you very much, and if you could please take on notice providing us with some of the detail of the ways that toilets were considered by the LHD in that work. We'd really appreciate it. Thank you. I'll go to other members of the committee. Mr. Diano.
Dr. Kennedy, Health didn't make a submission to this inquiry. I'm just wondering why that was, given there's clearly some public health dimension to the terms of reference. Are you able to elaborate this? There also seems to be perhaps some reticence from the department to actually engage with this inquiry. I wonder if you could perhaps elaborate on why that is.
I'm not sure I can give all the reasons. I personally was unaware of the inquiry, and perhaps it had not been brought to the attention of relevant people within the Ministry of Health, or perhaps it had been brought to the attention and the terms of reference did not appear to be entirely relevant for health. And when I myself looked at the terms of reference, although I could see that there might be some health aspects, I did think that the main emphasis of the work of the committee would be around accessibility of public toilets, and so aside from that, I can't give any particular explanation of why it was not brought to the attention, or whether it was, if it was brought to the attention, it was not given any particular priority.
I suppose the sort of adjunct to that question is one of the things that the committee has been considering is there's obviously an absence of a sort of regulatory framework that deals with public toilets. There's, you know, we've had Safe Work here talking about a sort of an aspect of their sort of regulatory oversight in terms of toilets that are available for workers but not for the general public. And then obviously there's the dimension that involves local councils. One of the things that we're considering as a committee is the idea of perhaps putting some of that regulatory framework in the Public Health Act. I wonder if you could perhaps offer some comment about the suitability of that as an appropriate way to, I suppose, fill the regulatory gap that we've identified.
Sure, I can provide some comments. I guess the Public Health Act is something that our branch has a fair amount to do with, and the overall assessment of what should and should not be in the Public Health Act is maybe not for me to decide, but it certainly is there. And the objects of the Act, which I can read out because I've got it open in front of me, are to promote and protect and improve public health, to control the risks to public health, to promote the control of infectious diseases, to prevent the spread of infectious diseases, to recognise the role of local government in protecting public health, to monitor diseases and conditions affecting public health. So they're reasonably broad, but I think that the main objective is a focus on real and serious risks to public health. So as an example, our particular branch is involved in some of the elements to do with safety of drinking water, Legionella control, skin penetration. Now, Legionella control obviously is important because it's something that does result in serious infection, ICU admission, death, and we've had a recent example in the city of an outbreak like that. So control of warm water systems and cooling towers is important to try to prevent those kinds of infections. So similar with drinking water, I guess the risk there with drinking water for if there is failures in drinking water supply is potentially an infection of very large numbers of people, and so you can see that there's a good reason to have that in the Public Health Act. And similarly for skin penetration, the main reason for regulating that area is to try to prevent cross-contamination in usually in healthcare settings where there is like practices that might engage in tattooing or cosmetic procedures, and so they need to make sure that instruments are sterilised so that there's no cross-infection of hepatitis B, hepatitis C, which again are reasonably serious infections. So I guess that's where we place the emphasis in the Public Health Act. So I think in order to
so perhaps if I can just sort of break down some of what you've said. In terms of, obviously there's the sort of regulatory functions of the Public Health branch fulfil under the auspices of the Public Health Act. But is it not the case that local government have some regulatory functions under the Public Health Act as well?
They do. It's local government participate with health in implementing the Public Health Act. So if you go to an individual local health district, they will often have there'll be a an agreement of some sort with sometimes just it may not be a formal agreement, but it can also be something like a memorandum of understanding, so that the local environmental health officers and local government are doing some activities, for example, checking on some of the places like beauty parlours where there might be skin penetration activity, and so they may be administering the bulk of that, they might be doing the bulk of the work associated with administering the Public Health Act in those particular settings.
So it's feasible that we could have a regulatory regime embedded in the Public Health Act around public toilets, but with the actual regulatory functions devolved to perhaps local government. Is that under the current scheme, that wouldn't be at odds with the current framework for how the Public Health Act operates?
It wouldn't be at odds with the current framework. Yes, that's correct.
So, for example, you've raised the issue around sharps and skin penetration, a requirement around sharps disposal in public toilets. That would sit pretty comfortably, wouldn't it, in a Public Health Act framework?
Yes, the sharps disposal sort of provisions that we have at the moment are generally in those settings where sharps are used on patients and the skin is broken, rather than for provisions for needles that might have been used by diabetics or injecting drug users. It's the main problem, I suppose, with the administration of the Public Health Act is that is really local government is constrained in what it can particularly do, and so there are some local governments that are not able to always fulfil all of those sort of joint regulatory functions under the Public Health Act. And so if there was to be another layer that was added, then of course there would need to be significant consultation with local government.
Okay. I might hand over to the other committee members, given the time.
Can I just jump in following on from that? You said that local government was constrained to fulfil some of the requirements in the Public Health Act. Could you outline what they are? What
the local government needs to do, or usually
what's
does.
Not being done, and the reasons for it. Is it funding? Is it a infrastructure issue? So obviously there are requirements they should be or that should be done. You've indicated that it's not currently being fulfilled. So I'm interested to know what those are specifically and what the barriers are.
I can't answer the specifics because I think that's probably the role of either local government or to answer, or the specific local government authority.
But you would be aware of some of the
I am
challenges?
aware of some instances where, and I'd have to take that on notice to actually tell you about the local government authorities that we're aware of, but there are some that I believe have withdrawn from administering elements of the Public Health Act just because they don't have the resources to commit to it. Either resources in terms of staff, that is generally environmental health officers, or they don't have the resources in terms of money, I suppose. So that's a very general answer, but I can provide perhaps some greater detail for you.
And I'm happy if you don't necessarily want to name councils, but I'm more interested if they're withdrawing from adhering to an act because of resourcing. That's a big issue, particularly when it comes to public health.
Sure.
Just in relation to I'm interested in, you talked about some of the basic standards, whether it's running water, having paper and available. I travel, like a lot of our colleagues, regional country roads quite often, and you will stop along the roadside and you will come quite often across public toilets that, where in some cases the water doesn't work at all. Do you think it is appropriate or timely to do basically an audit of some of these toilets from a health perspective to ensure that the standards are there?
I hesitate to provide an answer because I'm very conscious of the enormous number of public toilets that there may be, and so any sort of audit is resource intensive, and it's probably, I would say, beyond the capability, at least of health and our public health workforce, which is not enormous. So usually in any local government or any local health district, we may have, in a population of 1 million, we might have 3 or 4 environmental health officers. They would be kept busy for a long time, so it would need to be done as a kind of self-audit or something like that. I don't believe we would be able to have the means or capacity to be able to do, an audit such as that.
Mm-hmm. And from a Department of Health perspective, what role do you actually play when it comes to ensuring public toilets accessibility or availability? Is there any particular part of an act or anything, or is it more just a general?
We play no role that I'm aware of.
Yeah, that's fine. Thank you.
Some questions. I just, with regard to standards, I wondered what public health standards currently apply to the maintenance of public toilets across New South Wales. Just so that I have a base.
I'm not aware of any public health standards that apply. That is standards that we control or administer in any way. We have policy directives for the public health for public toilets that relate to public toilets in our public facilities. And there would be, there are also design standards for public toilets in public health facilities.
Can I ask on notice, perhaps you could provide those to the committee?
Sure, I can provide the links and to those. But no standards generally that I'm aware of, and so that would be through other means, Australian standards or something like that.
Okay. And I'm just wondering then, are there minimum expectations, if you like, for say cleaning, for the cleaning frequency or facility design to support the public health outcomes?
Cleaning frequency, I would have to take that on notice.
Yeah, if you
and but there would be some standards within public health facilities. They may not be directly applicable to public toilets that are less frequently used, or where there might be the risk profile of the clients that use them might be different.
Yep. And then I'm just wondering, like with the experience of managing, say, COVID-19, has that changed hygiene expectations for public toilets?
I would say no.
No? Okay. Okay. Well then, would you support, say, integrating minimum hygiene standards into public toilet design regulations?
Of course, I would support that, and I would have thought that that was part of the design task.
Yeah. Okay. And then I'm just wondering, like, with regard to, say, maintenance of public toilets, how important is, say, rapid maintenance of public toilets to overall public health? You know, like if there's graffiti or broken taps, things like that, where you can't fulfill cleaning your hands and things like that. So,
I think that's a difficult question to answer. Yeah, obviously that affects accessibility, and so that goes to the overall question of how the importance of public toilets generally for amenity and physical activity and people getting out and about, and so I can't provide an answer to that question.
mm-hmm. And just one final question. Do you communicate with, like, if there aren't any sort of standards, do you communicate with, say, councils or other service, where public toilets are provided, to sort of say what the minimum expectations are, or how are we informed about what the minimum standards would be?
Look, I would say that is almost never happens. It's not really on the health radar. So it's we as a branch, environmental health branch, don't have any policy involvement that would lead us to provide any advice to local government, shopping centres, anywhere else about how public toilets should be designed or run or organised. And I would say that occasionally that environmental health officers in local government would get involved perhaps in some of those discussions occasionally, but on the whole it's not something that is in our range of responsibilities.
And are you consulted at all?
No.
No. Okay.
So I wanted to ask, we've heard some evidence from Incontinence Australia about the preponderance of incontinence in the population. I think the suggestion was 1 in 4 people have incontinence. Obviously, there's a public health dimension to making sure the provision of adequate facilities to manage incontinence, and also I suppose there's the sort of the ancillary issue, which is about the sort of mental health impacts of people who suffer from incontinence and therefore feel constrained in terms of their ability to get out and about. And I wondered, within health, how do those issues, as an organisation, how are you grappling with those issues and the intersection between sort of, I suppose, the public health provision, but also sort of the mental health impacts? Obviously it's not the environmental branch. How does that work within the organisation? How do you grapple with a problem that's sort of intersecting sort of various aspects of the sort of public health problem, the mental health kind of space?
Look, I think you identify, a more general problem in a very large organisation like New South Wales Health, where we've got different sections, different branches will have different views and responsibilities. So that may not involve the environmental health branch. It may or could involve the Centre for Population Health, that generally has the role of looking at physical activity, if that's a constraint, and if that's the main lens that you're viewing that problem through, then it may be something that they address. It could also be something that becomes within the remit of the Clinical Excellence Commission, or a more clinical entity within health who is dealing with issues of incontinence. But there's no single post box, that's for sure.
So here's the question then. I mean, here's a problem that requires some level of interagency coordination. What would be the tool that health would use to try and address this at a policy level to where you've got a number of stakeholders, one of which obviously is local government and their expectation that they would provide these facilities? Like, is there some kind of mechanism or a standard in terms of how health would provide guidance to local government to address a population health problem like this?
There are always mechanisms for working across government, and depending on the area that you work in, then you will have your key relationships. And now it's the challenge is to I suppose find part of government that sees it as their responsibility primarily, and so. If it's a question of what are we going to do about incontinence generally, I mean, like the access to public toilets is going to be a very a small aspect of that, and so I guess it needs to be put to government and to try to find out. Or there needs to be a recommendation to some section of government. I can't really say that health is the natural place to begin to address a cross government issue like this.
Well, who would it be? I mean, obviously, it's clearly a health problem. It's got mental health, it's got physical health dimensions, population health. Like, what other agency would be appropriate? I suppose we're trying to find the appropriate place in terms of crafting recommendations from this committee about dealing with the issue of public toilets. There's clearly a regulatory void, and I think you highlight in your evidence the sort of, I suppose, the various, for want of a less pejorative term, but silos that exist within health, and public toilets don't really fit anywhere. And they certainly, we're trying to kind of overcome that void and find a place to locate sort of the lead authority. Where's the appropriate place in health for that?
Look, it's probably not for me to venture an opinion. However, I will point out that there are other government departments that will have a stake: the Department of Local Government and the Department of Planning. Because I think probably some of the business I would think of the committee is about, where are we going to, where are the model designs and are the existing standards sufficient and where should they be housed? So I don't know whether health is the place where you find model designs that then drive either construction or maintenance or of existing facilities. It's so I.
Is it fair to say though that there's obviously the solution end of the problem, but actually there's the sort of policy goal, and most of those relate to health-related issues, mental health, hygiene, access to safe facilities for a range of populations that are potentially vulnerable. Isn't health the sort of policy locus for this, given that's, like they're trying to address health-related problems? The solutions might be in local government, might be in planning, some aspects of it, but in terms of the objects of the sort of solving the policy problem, doesn't that appropriately lie with health?
Well, I think there are some elements that are relevant to health. I don't know whether the total policy objective sits with health, because I think a lot of it is about appropriate accessibility provisions, and they're not strictly a health concern. They're more about rights and entitlements and equity and fairness and they're things that health is cognizant of, but I don't think the overall objective is about improving health. It's about improving amenity, I think.
I think Mr. Lawrence has joined us. He may have some questions as well.
No worries. Mr. Lawrence, did you have any questions?
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Just a couple of questions, and thanks so much for your evidence, Mr. Connerty. And I'm sorry I've come in late because I had an event to go to, so apologies if it's repetitive. My questions, that is. Just on that last question that you answered, I was wondering if you could explain a bit more what you see as the distinction between amenity and health here. Like, in what sense is this an amenity issue rather than a health issue? Because we have had quite a lot of evidence about health issues, and I suppose some could be characterised as strictly health issues, but others I would have thought might be characterised as issues that go to well-being, inclusion, things like that, that seem quite cognate to health at the very least. So I was wondering if you could just maybe expand on that last point.
I'll do my best, but I don't think it is a hard or fixed line, and so there's many issues that where there is an interface between or a spectrum along which you'll find amenity issues and health issues. So from the perspective of maybe an elderly member of our community who doesn't have fantastic bladder function, then being able to get out and be confident that they will be able to find a public toilet and it will be convenient and clean these are all amenity considerations, I think, and the same for members of of the community with a disability. So if they can find a public toilet that they can use, then and that will of course improve their physical activity and probably their health and probably their mental health, and if we don't have some of the negative consequences of using a public toilet because it is clean and hygienic and doesn't transmit disease, and or the risks of using it are very low, then yeah, they're health considerations. But I think they're difficult to tease apart.
I was wondering also, thanks for that answer, is there an analogy here with another area of policy, maybe waste management or something like that, where you could just explain how your area of the health department provides assistance or guidance in that respect? And I ask that because I just saw on the website of your particular division of the health department that environmental health includes waste management, or that sort of concept could include waste management, garbage disposal and the like. Is that an area where state health works with local government, whether by way of guidelines or policy assistance or things of that nature? Or is that more a legislative area of intervention indeed that I'm unaware of?
Look, it's probably not the best area to take as an analogy, largely because health has over time had less and less to do with waste. So historically, I think health and environmental health, which is a reasonably old part of the Ministry of Health, if you like, has moved away from the administration of waste. Now it's much more firmly within the realm of local government, and also the EPA, which has more significant tranches of legislation that deal with waste. So we don't really regulate waste any further. We did have a role with particularly with hospital waste and the use and contaminated waste and how that should be dealt with, and but that has also largely been handed over to Health Share, which is a different part of health.
And is your area involved in things that might broadly be considered planning issues, but things which on a population-wide level might, for instance, lead to injury or ill health? Is there like an analogy somewhere there?
Health largely plays an advisory role. However, we do have, and we work with the Department of Planning, mainly in providing advice on major projects. So there is a mechanism for various agencies to make submissions on major projects if they may involve health. So it's not the only intersection that we have with the Department of Planning, and but it's probably the one which takes the most time for us.
Does health get involved in advising on population-wide health consequences? What are particular projects, do they? Or, like, is that what you mean by that?
The major projects that appear on the major projects website for the Department of Planning, there might be for mines or major roadways, very large housing developments, energy infrastructure, etc. They're the ones where there are the Secretary of the Department of Planning has requirements which must be met by the proponent, and they also invite other agencies to both submit against the environmental impact statement and to sometimes have their own requirements on a particular project.
And is that because there's a body of expertise inside health who might have something to say about the public health implications of those sorts of projects?
Yeah, it's usually there are sometimes human health risk assessments that are done associated with these larger projects, and so yes, our branch has some expertise in human health risk assessment and reviewing those, and so that might have to do with air pollution, noise, or other consequences of particular kinds of developments.
Sorry to interrupt you, Mr. Lawrence. We're
Sure.
we're actually out of time,
Sure.
so I might ask that your remaining questions be submitted as supplementary questions.
I'll do that. Thanks so much, Chair. Thanks, Mr. Connerty.
Thank you so much, Dr. Connerty, for the time you've provided today to provide evidence to us, and the Secretariat will be in touch about the questions that you've taken on notice, and I imagine there's going to be some supplementary questions as well.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Made quite a trip to be with us today. We really appreciate it. Could you start by stating your name and your position title and taking either the oath or the affirmation?
Yep, my name's Bob Triming, Chairperson Secretary of the Bathurst Regional Access Committee, for short, BRAC, you'll hear me refer to. I swear that the evidence now about to be given by me shall be the truth, the whole truth and nothing but the truth, so help me God.
Thank you. Would you like to start by making a short opening statement?
Yes, thanks. First off, thanks for facilitating our attendance here, and thanks for getting rid of the rain.
No problem.
My wife is here as a member of BRAC, but also as Macara because I need her assistance. I wish to make full use of mine and your time whilst here. Please note that in BRAC's submission I was described as being a member of the PDCN Lived Experience Advisory Panel at the time of writing. That has now concluded. Being from Bathurst, we come from the land of the Wiradjuri. I am on the New South Wales Health Public Advisory Panel for the redevelopment of the Bathurst Hospital, currently in operation, been on that for a couple of years. All my comments, as was BRAC's submission, based on the lived experience of myself and our members and members of the public who consistently contact BRAC for assistance. We are not an official committee of council. We're independent. We have considerable experience, having been in existence for over 34 years, advocating for the general public and tackling not only council-related issues, but all those that involve the built environment, including commercial and private entities, as well as providing advice to builders and developers. So thank you, and I hope my comments will help in your deliberations.
Thank you very much, and thank you for the quite detailed written submission you've provided as well, which is full of photos, which has been really helpful to us, having not been able to visit Bathurst ourselves.
Thank you. May I just say, I have difficulty hearing, so if people could be able to speak up without me sounding rude, but I want to be able to understand.
No problem. Thanks for letting us know. My first question is about the provision of information in the Bathurst community. The committee's heard a lot of evidence about the National Public Toilet Map app. Your written submission also mentioned the council having a CBD toilet map and an accessible guide to the region. Could you talk about the way that information's provided in your local community?
Yeah, that forms a booklet called the Accessible Guide to Bathurst, which is available at the Tourist Bureau and on the council website for both tourism, and also the council provides us with a page on their website for the Access Committee, and there's links to it on that. And in the middle of that, it's a complete accessible guide for those relevant businesses such as restaurants, hotels, pharmacies and so forth. And then the Access Committee are the ones who provide the information to council, and we do a lot of work every year when I'm chairperson of it, of verifying phone numbers and so forth, and making sure that our ratings... Now, we also have a map in the centre of it that has the CBD and the positions of all the accessible toilets, and this week, hopefully, it will be upgraded to also include the new permanent adult change room that's just been completed, as well as the mobile adult change room that's owned and operated by Vivability, and that sits beside or near the Adventure Playground, which is our major playground for kids and has some all-ability equipment in it. And it also gets moved to things like the Bathurst Show and the races, of which we're famous for, and other venues for public events. And that's owned and operated by Vivability in Bathurst.
Thank you. You've obviously put a huge amount of work into successfully advocating for important upgrades for accessible toilets at key council facilities in Bathurst. Could you speak to your experience in advocating for that change? What did it take to get the decision makers to agree to do that work?
In short, otherwise you'll be here all day. You would have seen by the submission we're still waiting after 15 years now. It was 14 years when the submission was written, for a proper accessible toilet at the Library Art Gallery. My wife often uses the library. I can't go with her because I can't get into the toilet, as you would have seen by the photo we supplied with the support of the Western Advocate. I attend most council general meetings and policy meetings where there's a public forum, and I speak. The only time I don't attend, if it's heavy rain or if I'm crook. We get good support from the council officers. However, the difficulty in a council area is it's the councillors that supply the senior staff with the money to provide the facilities, and that just doesn't happen. I mean, to wait for 15 years, even in council chambers, which is the only, the meeting room for the Access Committee is in council chambers because we're voluntary and we don't have any funds whatsoever. It took me 9 years, I think it was, to get an accessible toilet in council chambers. And it all boils down to money. The senior staff are willing, and I guess I could give an example of when I found out that the accessible toilet at Safala, one of our main tourist villages, they were closing it except for when the Progress Association had events on in the town, because council built the septic toilet there next to all the community halls, but it was the Progress Association that had to pay for the maintenance and upkeep, and the septic tank was built too small and they couldn't get anywhere with council, so they spoke to me, and because I used to, up until last year, conduct the Anzac Day services for them on behalf of the RSL, they spoke to me, so I raised it with council, which resulted in council now maintaining but also rebuilding the size of the septic system, so it can now be open 7 days a week. So there's a lot of facilities like that. You know, we've got a toilet on the main entrance to the city from the Orange Way, opposite the jail, which is the main place it goes to, and that was in my submission, was the picture of that accessible toilet with the graffiti on the walls, etc. That's slated to be rebuilt this year, but now it's been put on the back burner because I disagreed with the location. It would have meant all the little kids on the playground and whatnot would have to cross an access road into this tourist rest area to a centre island, and that's where they were going to put the toilets together with the new accessible toilet. So that's been put on the back burner because they've now got to wipe out the existing toilet block and put it in. But once again, it's finance. You're probably aware that Bathurst Council is seriously financial deficient. And like the art gallery toilets was promised to me for about the last 5 years, I ended up getting a guarantee of a rebuild, and the plans have been approved last year and it was supposed to be built, but now we have to wait for land sales to happen for council to have the finances to do it. So it is a big financial burden, and more so when the national building codes now require ambulance toilets, so any rebuild, that just adds to the cost, which I think should be helped by the state government in this case.
Thank you. I'll go to other members of the committee for questions.
I've got some questions, Chair, if no one else does at this stage, but I'm happy to go next as well.
That's right. Happy for you to go, Mr. Lawrence, and then Mrs. McLaren-Jones.
Okay, so thanks, Mr. Trimming, for your submission. I've got to say it's one of the best community group submissions that I've seen. It's excellent, and thank you for drawing our attention to those newspaper headlines, which did bring a smile to my face, some of them. I was just curious, firstly, on On page 3 of the submission, there's a picture of a public toilet in Bathurst. Is that the public toilet on the western entrance to Bathurst?
Yes, it is, opposite the jail in
I've often used that
Hector
a few
Park.
times.
Yeah.
Is that a particular example of what you would say is very much a substandard, out-of-date public toilet in the Bathurst area?
Well, not only Bathurst area, but across the state. And, you know, when we travel, and I'm now restricted in my travel because I can barely get to Orange for disability conferences, much less anywhere else because of my issues. But yes, and that whilst that's in the CBD, I only got a report and I wasn't able to study it before coming here from a person out at Wattle Flat who complained to me about the toilets, but that'll take a special effort to get out there to see what she's talking about and see how the Access Committee can help. But, you know, with narrow doors and the graffiti, and that accessible toilet is actually so small that I thought the art gallery was the world's smallest accessible toilet, but this one is even smaller. You wouldn't even fit a pushed wheelchair in it, and that's why it's been rebuilt. But you know, once again, we have to wait on finances.
Yeah. You make an interesting point right at the end of the submission about you say access to accessible toilets is something that should not have to be fought for on an ongoing basis, should be automatic and take precedence over the millions spent on non-essential feel-good facilities. I'm just wondering, what do you think is the mechanism to address the first part of that sentence? What is the best mechanism to make sure that access to accessible toilets is something that is not going to have to be fought for on an ongoing basis? Do you think that we need a law that mandates councils and other relevant stakeholders to do it? Do you think we need a policy, a requirement that they all develop policies? What do you think is the best way?
I do think it needs the state government to pressure councils into taking it, making them a priority. And the reason I state that is, you know, I get a bit sick and tired of, whilst it's great to have sporting facilities, and they are a great necessity, in any community, but the millions upon millions that we're spending on football fields and, you know, car parks, sealed car parks for those football fields, and not just one football field, you know, multiples of buildings and fields and car parking for, I think it was around 600 cars or something in Bathurst. I know it's got 15 disability parking spots, so it just gets annoying that money is spent and on new infrastructure, but nothing gets done about existing council infrastructure. And that's our biggest beef, because if council infrastructure was up to standard, you know, we would get into more places. I mean, the Bathurst Memorial Entertainment Centre, it's got an accessible toilet on the bottom floor. On the top floor, where there's meeting rooms and also access to the entertainment centre seating for the stage, etc., there's toilets for those without disability, but not those who have a disability. So if it's deemed necessary to have a toilet for people who don't have a disability, why do they think people with a disability don't need to go to the toilet? And we've hassled that quite a bit, but we've lost that one. Once again, no money. So I guess that was the other thing with any enforcement that you may bring in. Somehow there's got to be a complaints section instead of going through the Human Rights Commission or the New South Wales Disability Board of Discrimination. And I give as an example, how long has a new commercial building been required to have access? And sorry, not necessarily a new build, I guess. We had an incident in Bathurst where a restaurant in an existing building, in a multi-tenanted building, put in a new entrance, and on the plans it said it was going to be accessible, because I studied the plans. It was created as inaccessible, brand new entrance, and council has now permitted it. So if council's not obligated to abide by the Australian building standards and nothing can be enforced, apparently, how are we going to have standards set by the state government that councils have to abide by and make sure they're enforced? There needs to be someone that, you know, people like me or anyone with a disability can send an email or correspondence and say, look, this is the issue we've got. It's not being done as per the required guidelines, and then whatever that regulatory body is can then suggest to council, hey, you've got to do it. And perhaps that would persuade councillors then to provide the money to the staff. And I repeat, it's not the senior staff that's the issue. We've now got one councillor in Bathurst who runs one of Bathurst's biggest disability organisations, but he's one of 9. He does an excellent job, and he's the councillor delegate to the Access Committee. You know, we get the general manager who attend our meetings, who takes copious notes on council issues. But once again, no one can do anything unless the councillors provide the dough.
Yeah. Does Bathurst Regional Council have a public toilet policy, to your knowledge?
No, I can't answer that. And I guess by now, over the 20 or so years that I've been involved, I think I would have come across it. I know we've got footpath policy and goodness knows what else. There's not an issue. I mean, I heard the previous speaker. There's not an issue in Bathurst. If I ring council and say there's a dirty public toilet that needs cleaning during the day, they'll immediately send the cleaners out. In the CBD, I know they're cleaned 3 or so times a day. But let's face it, you could clean the toilet now, and then by the time the next person's used it, it could be totally disgusting. And that's the issue that councils are faced. As for the cleaning of village toilets and public toilets, I can't say.
Thanks very much for those answers, Mr. Trimming, and for your submission again. It was really helpful. Thanks, Chair. That's my questions.
Mrs. McLean.
Thank you very much. I've only got a couple of questions. First of all, thank you very much for coming in today and for your submission. Just in relation to funding, you've touched on it in your submission. I was wondering whether or not you or your committee was ever given an overall budget of what council was being asked for. I'm keen to know across all different areas how much it actually costs to whether it's a rebuild or a brand new accessible toilets in an area.
Right, the art gallery toilet was originally too dear. They were going to build a standalone toilet that could be used after hours. Now they're going to revamp the interior toilets because my understanding is the women's toilet's not too crash hot either. And that budget was $500,000. Not saying that is what it'll take to finish the build. The Hector Park toilets, as described there, is the rough budget is $800,000, and the question was raised because in council, when public asks the questions of council, it's Bob's public toilet. It's not the public toilet for everyone. For some reason, everything belongs to me when it comes to disability, which I get annoyed at.
Yeah.
And that was $800,000. The newly completed adult change room, together with an ambulant toilet and male and female toilets, and I think that block may have a unisex toilet as well, but don't take my memory on that. That was closer to $1 million, 960,000, because there was a big blue that was raised as to why the expensive cost.
Yep.
Because we actually wanted the adult change room to be positioned in Macquarie Park, which is central to where all the winter festival, the CBD, everything is, but instead they put it down near the river in Peace Park, simply because they had to rebuild that toilet block. And according to the Director of Engineering, they tried to do a complete rebuild of one public toilet a year, which is all they could afford.
And the $1 million one, how many cubicles did that include?
Can't tell you because I haven't been into the disability toilet is one,
Yep.
and the whole block, you enter each section individually by an accessible path, and the adult change room is one end, and that's run by an M-lock electronic sliding door, which I thought was absolutely fantastic, because one of my biggest beefs with toilets is the opening force. It was what was raised when they built the new hospital at Bathurst 15 years ago, and you couldn't get into the disability toilets. So they're now double swing doors, which is excellent, but I prefer the electronic sliding door, and it's controlled by an MLAC key, and the same goes with the accessible toilet. Now, the accessible toilet's controlled by an MLAC key, but it's open during the day for anyone to use. The adult change room, the only way to get in it is with an MLAC key.
And that brings me to the next questions about the MLOC key. Could you just outline for the committee how that works? And you've raised concerns about who can actually get access to that key.
Yeah, my concerns were more to misinformation I'd heard and read that only doctors can prescribe or can give permission for an MLAC key, and of course that's totally wrong. I can provide a letter of advice, being a disability organisation,
Yep.
and whilst it's a $20 deposit, we try and push the MLAC key whenever we can. It's just a shame that and I might note with respect that you guys call it MLAC key. It's not. It's MLAK. So you might like to sort that out in your correspondence. The and it's readily available from any master locksmith of Australia's key places, or you can send to Melbourne, and the Master Locksmiths Association will upon you sending $20, will send an MLAC key as long as you've got a letter of authorisation. Some places have an MLAC key and they have a sign up saying MLAC key located at such and such a place. That's not really feasible for council public toilets. But, you know, I look at things with disability that people have also got to help themselves. Some people with disability expect everything to be done for them. So, you know, I carry an MLAC key here. So it's with the wheelchair, so I always have it. Yeah. It's not on my car key ring or anything else. You know, people have to sort of self-educate in items like that. But also it's, you know, if most signs have this toilet, the correct signage is this toilet, something like this toilet is operated by a MLAC key. Yeah. So if I rolled up to a toilet and didn't know what an MLAC key was, I'd ask someone or ask council, what's an MLAC key? Yeah. And you'd be told where to get one. I've suggested that perhaps tongue-in-cheek, maybe council or state government could help subsidise the keys, because $20 is a lot for a person on a pension. But it does help. I notice the metro toilets and the new train stations here. I was in one this morning just before I got here, and it didn't need an MLAC key, and it was the best accessible toilet I've ever been in, and that's the one in Martin Place. You know, electronic entry, electronic push button for the toilet, you name it. Even the colour scheme was appropriate for people with vision impairment. And one of the issues that was raised a couple of BRAC meetings ago by a person with vision impairment attending was signage on public toilets, because normally it's black on dark grey. Yep. Technically a 30% luminance contrast as per the rules, but people with vision impairment really need black on white, or like the Martin Place toilet, it was black on a very, very light grey. So you've got to take into account that if a person with vision impairment goes into a toilet and it's a white bowl, white walls and white floor, yes, great, looks lovely and clean, but people with vision impairment can't see where the toilet bowl is. So things like that have to be taken into account, and that's where we provide advice. I mean, whilst builders have access to the Australian Building Code, I don't. Yeah. I can't afford it, which is something else. You know, to me, organisations, voluntary organisations who help people with disability should somehow be allowed to procure one copy, because it's well over $1,000 and we can't afford that. So I bombard the Director of Planning and the Director of Engineering with unlimited questions, and they're excellent in their responses. But yeah, so I hope that
helps. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you. We are over time for this session. Thank you again so much for making the trip to provide evidence for us today, and I imagine that there will be supplementary questions from committee members, and the Secretariat will be in touch with you about those questions.
Yep, no worries. Thanks
Thank you
very
so
much
much
for
again.
your time.
We'll now break for morning tea, and I think just because we're 5 minutes behind, we'll break for 15 minutes morning tea and start again at 11:50. Welcome. Thank you so much for making the time to give evidence to the committee today. Could we start with each of you please stating your name and position title and taking either the oath or the affirmation? We might start with you, Mr. Griffith.
Damien Griffiths, CEO, First Peoples Disability Network. I'll take the affirmation. I solemnly, sincerely and truly declare and affirm that the evidence now about to be given by me shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth.
Thank you.
My name is Catherine Wolfgram, and I'm here on behalf of Black Aboriginal Corporation. I'm speaking in place of my CEO, as she's in apologies. I'm the Community and Advocacy Coordinator.
Wonderful. And could you please take either the oath or the affirmation?
I, Catherine Wolfgram, solemnly, sincerely and truly declare and affirm that the evidence now about to be given by me shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth.
Thank you. Would either of you like to start by making a short opening statement?
I'm happy to. Yep, sure. I'd just like to make some opening remarks, if I may. At the First Peoples Disability Network, so we're a national peak organisation representing First Nations people with disability and their families. Very unique organisation in that we are governed by First Nations people with disability, and most of our staff are First Nations people with disability as well, including several staff who are wheelchair users with significant physical disability. Access to accessible toilets is a right, not a favour, and I think that's something that needs to be evolved in understanding the provision of accessible bathrooms. And often when I reflect upon the life of my colleagues with physical disability, their opportunity to live a spontaneous life is naturally very restricted, and often restricted by the lack of accessible public toilets. So perhaps as myself, as an able-bodied person, if I want to go to the movies this afternoon, I can go to the movies this afternoon. But if you're a wheelchair user, you have to plan every moment of your life, and your opportunity to live a spontaneous life is very restricted by physical access, including and especially access to accessible public toilets. In my travels throughout the country, but particularly in New South Wales and including far western New South Wales, and to be honest, once we go beyond the Blue Mountains and Sydney, Newcastle, Wollongong, the provision of accessible toilets is often highly problematic and random, really, when I consider how difficult it's been for some of my colleagues to travel who are wheelchair users. So there are particular challenges in regional remote New South Wales, and I think the previous speaker touched on some of those issues, certainly the Bathurst region, but we would be very concerned, and in particular about the situation in more remote parts of the state, particularly in the western part of the state. And also access is many different things. There's not just physical access to public toilets. Toilets, and perhaps I'm sharing a personal experience here, appear to be becoming far more complicated. I've certainly had that experience and made rather a fool of myself on a number of times, whether the soap dispenser is sensory or the water, whatever it might be. So, and there's rarely any or no signage usually to provide instruction on how to use such facilities, and that can be very problematic for people perhaps with cognitive impairment in accessing bathrooms. The previous speaker spoke about access for people with vision impairment, but also intensity of lighting. Sometimes the way tiles are arranged can be confusing for some people. They have very sensory disability as well, perhaps if they're on the spectrum, and perhaps may be triggered by particular lighting or particular designs as well. So I think we need to think more beyond just physical access. It also relates to people with vision impairment, people with cognitive impairment, and other range of disability as well. So thank you.
Thank you very much. Do you have an opening statement?
Yes, please forgive me. I was only called in this morning. If I seem unprepared. So Black Aboriginal Corporation is the peak LGBT First Nations organisation in New South Wales. Even though I'm not Aboriginal, I do come to the table with the lived experience of a transgender woman of colour for 35 years. And that lens and what those hurdles bring as well. So I'd also like for you to consider that Aboriginal people face daily discrimination, and on top of that, they face discrimination for being LGBT, our members. So that's double discrimination, which makes them doubly vulnerable to situations. In the case of transgender people, there are stages to transition. The first stage, you don't wake up looking glorious. You're very obvious to everyone that you are transgender. And that is when you're most vulnerable to violence and to discrimination, especially with the climate around the world at the moment, where we see the bathroom debate arise, and objections to transgender people using bathrooms will only be at the very start of their transition. There will be no question, of course, once we have developed, and so I think this is an opportune time to be able to discuss this, because I have always, with the debates whirling around, I have moved more to the gender-neutral toilets. Well, they're cleaner and they're bigger, so. But I think it's quite difficult to ask for these things sometimes. Like, I have asked at this train station for the gender-neutral toilet because it's always locked, especially at the old stations, and they've always pointed me towards the women's loo, and I've had to insist on the gender-neutral toilets, and I think, it would be great to have more availability and more access for gender-neutral toilets to be available, particularly outside of the CBD. Not that I travel that far, but, I'm sure that there would be less availability of gender-neutral toilets, and then we extend that also to schools, where young people are now transitioning. There is not always the availability of a gender-neutral bathroom. So I feel that it is something that I can strongly recommend, and can, as an advocate for my population, that it's an opportune time to bring this up.
Thank you very much. I have a couple of my own questions, and then we'll go to questions from other members of the committee. I'll start with you, Mr. Griffiths, but please feel free, both of you, to answer this question. You mentioned in your opening statement that it's your view that access to toilets is a right rather than a favour. We've heard through this inquiry that there currently isn't any legislation or responsible body to ensure that toilets are provided to a certain standard or in certain locations. What would be your view on legislating a positive duty on public or private entities, or both, to actually ensure access to public toilets?
Would absolutely support that, Chair, and I think the UN Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disability discusses liberty and freedom of movement and those sort of provisions. So I think there are rights already enshrined in international law that could be a reference point for framing such legislation. I think too often in Australia, and perhaps a more general observation, having been CEO of my organisation for 25 years now and seen the evolution of disability rights in Australia, we still have a very, very long way to go. And I think in many ways, people with disability are still viewed as perhaps a burden or not valued members of society. We've seen some evolution in that, and I think that's positive, and that should be recognised and acknowledged. But the lack of understanding by decision makers of the lived experience of people with disability, I think, is still a long way off. The point I made earlier about the things that we get to enjoy as able-bodied people are not well understood in terms of what we understand our experience, but understanding the experience of people whose lives are seriously restricted in every day and that are effectively captives of care in many ways is really critical to making positive change. And a simple premise as well is in the legislation, any potential legislation, and a fairly logical approach, I would argue, is having wheelchair users assist with drafting that legislation. I'm sure you've probably already heard in the committee plenty of examples, and I've seen these over the years as well, well-intentioned accessible facilities that are not accessible at all. And they're often because they weren't designed by a wheelchair user. So perhaps the wrong slope, for example, in entering a building. A pretty simple fix there would be to ask a person who uses such a facility is this right? Have we got this right? So I think in any legislative approach, it has to be involving of people that are users of accessible toilets themselves. Hopefully that's a logical response in many ways. So thank you.
Absolutely. And just to, would you like to add something before I ask a follow-up question? Okay. You're sort of touching on perhaps the distinction here between consultation and actual co-design. Decision makers and government agencies often talk about consultation. Can you speak further to the importance of co-design and how that actually could or should be done if it's done well?
Yeah, I think in New South Wales and even Australia more generally, we still have a long way to go. The decision makers living with disability are uncommon in the bureaucracy and in the parliamentary system. And that means you can't be what you can't see. And I've learnt this valuable lesson over many years as an advocate. I'm a person who identifies with psychosocial disability, but I am still learning every day through my colleagues of the barriers that they face. I can assume to understand, but I must have the insight to recognise that the person with the lived experience is the expert. And it's not a great stretch to create an environment where those people have a voice, but more than a voice, actually are recognised for the expertise they have. Being a wheelchair user, perhaps we could sit in a wheelchair for 10 minutes and may give us some insight, but no, to be the true expert is to have the experience yourself. So I think we need to do much better in terms of decision makers and having Australians with disability, people from this state with disability in prominent positions as decision makers. Until we see that evolution, I think we're still going to be not best practice in terms of creating a universally accessible world for all people.
I would actually like to add to that. I would like to second Mr. Griffiths' comment about the consultation of people with lived experience in the design of public amenities, because needs are different, and with all due respect, empathy and sympathies are very nice, but they're not always sufficient to help with designing ease of access for things.
Thank you. I had a question for you, Ms. Wolfgram, but I imagine you both have a view on this as well. To follow up on your opening statement, you spoke quite eloquently about your own lived experience and the benefit of being able to access an all-gender toilet or gender-neutral toilet, unisex toilet. It's called all sorts of things.
Well, sorry, yes.
That's all right. My question was going to be, is it adequate that often the only gender-neutral option is also the disability-accessible toilet? Or is there a need for a separate able-bodied or gender toilet
I think,
separately from the disability access toilet?
I think disability access and gender neutral go hand in hand for a variety of reasons, one of them being economics. For myself, I only can speak about like years into the past, 35 years ago when I first started transitioning. It was a very nervous experience to use toilets around other people for physical reasons and psychological reasons. And I think as long as there is privacy in the gender neutral toilet to be able to, do things naturally but in peace, I think that is sufficient. Also, too, one must consider politics. If you move to give trans people a toilet, then there'll be people that will be upset about that because of special treatment. And they're usually the same people that don't want us to use their loos. So it's, that's the political minefield that we have to navigate. Personally, I'm very happy just to use the disability loos. Like I said, there's more room, and they're generally cleaner.
Yeah, and could I just ask a follow-up question picking up on that?
Of course.
It sounds like what you're saying, and I want to clarify my understanding, is your preference for using a disability toilet is because it's often a single-use cubicle where you have privacy.
Absolutely.
Rather than a shared area.
I'm using it because I'm a prominent trans advocate. So I don't want to be singled out for using a women's loo or anything like that. I'm just sort of preempting any political situation that I might enter. So that's why I started using the gender neutral loos. But I have come to enjoy them. But like I said, asking for them sometimes is difficult. Especially at railway stations outside of the city. I'll point to the gender neutral toilet and they'll go, oh, the women's toilet is open. And I'll go, yes, but I want to use the gender neutral toilet. And, so it's sort of, so that can, I'm not going to say anything, don't want to shock the poor man. So I usually just use the women's loo then. But it's, my reasoning for using the gender neutral toilets is political. It's just to keep peace in this climate.
Gosh, it's a lot of effort to go to just to pee like everybody else.
Isn't it? And no one really considers that. But it goes back to what Mr. Griffiths was saying about, having to plan your day around using a loo. Where is there access to this, and where am I safe to go to the loo? Where do I feel culturally safe to go to the loo? So these are all the things to be considered.
Thanks. Did you want to add anything?
No. I think that's very powerful testimony from my colleague here, and obviously safety is fundamental for everybody, and I think that's a very powerful sentiment that my colleagues made there. So,
okay. Thank you. I'll go to my colleagues on the committee for questions. Mrs. McDonald.
Sorry, follow up on the safety and feeling welcome, even though we say it's just a toilet, but it shouldn't be just a toilet. So what design or signage changes would make public toilets more safer or feel safer and more welcoming? And it's to both of you.
Did you want to go first?
Yeah. Oh, well, I think I would, around safety, proper lighting outside as well as inside, I think, to know that, you can sort of see those sort of things. Security cameras are good, just in case, heaven forbid, something should happen. But I'm talking in the most idealised situation. I would like cameras outside the entrance of the bathrooms, so that there can be witness to anything unsafe. It's a good deterrent too.
Yeah, I mean, it's an uncomfortable truth that people with disability are extremely vulnerable to abuse. And we know from the Disability Royal Commission that for women with disability not to have experienced abuse of some form, physical, sexual, would be pretty exceptional. So, and it's a hidden issue, frankly. And public toilets are places of risk for some women with disability, I would say. So anything that creates a potentially safer environment, I'd support the ideas put forward by my colleague. And the other challenge, I think, is how to create these spaces in a dignified way. And the principles of universal design can help with some of this. It's a naturally very segregated environment by definition. And again, adds to a perception that people with disability are of a different kind of human, to be honest. So we need to get to a place in society, and perhaps the lesson from First Nations people is really helpful here. In traditional language, we have no comparable word to disability. Disability has always been an accepted part of the human experience. We know that now because of an archaeological site at Lake Mungo, which has uncovered a single male footprint, and the archaeologists theorised that the person was moving at speed with a stick and participating in a hunt. And that's been dated at 25,000 years ago. So that shows we've always had modifications and support for our community members with disability. So the challenge we find now is we're in a world where labelling is what you need to take to get access to various supports. So ultimately, it'd be wonderful for society to evolve into a place where we have universal design, toilets are for everybody. I think we're a long way off that, sadly. But there are some valuable lessons from my community about how culture of inclusion is inherent in how we see the world, and evolving to that sort of place is where we need to get to as a society. Sadly, we are a very long way off when we hear of not only discrimination faced by people with disability, but friends from the transgender community as well. So, but how do we create an environment that's dignified, that doesn't clearly label this as that's your space over there, is the challenge going forward, I think. But safety is the number one priority, clearly.
And so, just as a follow-on then, so how could government better engage with, say, First Nations or First people with disability in that planning stage?
Yeah, so the co-design principles, I don't mean to be flippant when I say this. I'm a little bit nervous about the language of co-design. It's very popular now, and genuine co-design, which is about equal power sharing, and recognising that people that have the lived experience are the expert. I've worked with many colleagues with very significant disability. I have several colleagues with severe cerebral palsy. They are the experts in their life. I can assume to understand, and I can travel with them and see the challenges they face and the barriers they face, but they themselves know their own needs. And it doesn't seem to be a leap to me. I don't quite understand why we haven't evolved into that thinking in some ways. There are mechanisms established, the New South Wales Disability Council, there's legislative protections in terms of anti-discrimination, but it's the decision makers and the people that have authority having greater access and lived experience, I think, is where we need to aspire to as well.
And so Is there an example that you could sort of say a successful inclusive design in regional or remote or even metro New South Wales that you could point to as, and you know, like based on my previous question, maybe there wasn't co-design in that, but as a starting point?
I couldn't. I could perhaps try and find something and take it on notice.
Yeah.
I think the previous witness talked about access committees, and again, the power and authority that those committees have within big local council structures is the elephant in the room, I guess. How much influence do they actually have in creating change? Unfortunately, infrastructure, and again, any members who are from regional New South Wales know this as well as I do, that infrastructure, disability-related infrastructure is very poor in regional remote parts of the state, even down to footpaths. So we spend a lot of time in far western New South Wales, and if you're a wheelchair user, your wheelchair usually gets damaged pretty quickly. It's not because of mismanagement, it's because there's potholes in the footpath, or you can't even use a footpath actually, you have to use your wheelchair on the road. They're all, and then people don't have the appropriate wheelchairs, for example, all-terrain wheelchairs, for example. Very common story. And people then have to get their wheelchairs shipped off to Sydney or Adelaide or wherever it might be for repair, and they're without a wheelchair while that happens. So the infrastructure in disability is highly problematic, particularly in regional remote New South Wales. I often can't travel with my colleagues who have physical disability into more regional remote parts of the state, because they would fear that they wouldn't be able to do that travel. Yet we need them to be able to do that so they can start talking to the local access committee. So regional New South Wales in particular, I'm sure my colleague would have views as well.
That is a very important point. It's very well to have a fantastically designed loo, but if you're unable to access it for physical reasons, then that loo is useless. That's all I had to say about that.
And Ms. Wolfgram, how does the lack of, say, all gender, or what did you say, gender neutral?
Gender neutral.
Or safe toilets impact Aboriginal LGBTQI plus people?
Well, First Nations people have the same experiences as all people in reasons for transitioning, and everything else is exactly the same. And the issues will be exactly the same for a trans man. It will be, especially at the start, it will be about how to navigate going to the loo discreetly. A trans man in a men's room is a very vulnerable man indeed. And that's the same for trans women, and that's it doesn't matter what race, what community, the issues will be the same. Of course, there's also, there are some very racist places in this country where they will not be allowed access to the public toilets anyway. And that's outside of the eastern seaboard. We're talking about deep into Central Australia. There discrimination does exist. I've experienced it myself, and so I know. And I think even access to a locked up loo might be difficult for them because they're Aboriginal.
Thank you.
Not let alone LGBT.
Happy to go to other members of the committee.
I just have one question.
Go ahead.
you spoke about access to disability toilets being a sort of preferred option. I note that the access to the MLAC system is premised on having a disability. Do you think the requirements for access to MLAC should be extended to people in the transgender community?
I think you need to determine what disability is. If you determine that disability is a barrier, then transgender people face many barriers. They're just not physical. Most of them are social. They're in place. The barriers are in place for social reasons, and you know, I do go back to start of transition. That is physical disabilities. So yes, I think that is that's quite appropriate. Does that answer your question?
Yes, that does. Thank you. I might throw to Stephen maybe.
Thanks, Chair. I've just got one question as well. It's sort of been answered by aspects of the opening statements and the other questions, but I'm interested to know how inconsistent across the state in terms of local government areas is the provision of disability accessible toilets in a proper way. And to the extent there is inconsistency, how much is that to the detriment of Aboriginal people in terms of them perhaps disproportionately living in those areas that aren't as well serviced?
Yeah, thanks for the question. I'd probably answer it anecdotally. I don't have data specific to that, but I'm basing it on experience when travelling in regional remote parts of the state. Far western New South Wales communities, particularly the smaller ones, don't have accessible toilets. I've never seen them. But then I'd argue even in our larger regional centres beyond the Blue Mountains, there's challenges as well. I think the previous speaker talked about where these toilets are placed as well as being problematic. So, and it's also true that we, in our home state here, we don't meet the adult changing places, the adult changing facilities. I think we're only about a third of the capacity of what's happening in Victoria, for example. So that's highly problematic as well. So what that lends itself to is less visibility of people with physical disability in regional remote parts of the state. And that's not good. That doesn't reflect the reality of society either. It means that people are effectively, in some cases, locked away, for want of a better term, because they can't move around their community the same way other people can. And that's still a problem, certainly in our community. And we saw some of these challenges exposed during COVID, for example, as well, as you'd be very familiar, I'm sure, in some of our remote communities where we have a high proportion of Aboriginal people as well. So, yeah, I think there's a very long way to go. I think in metropolitan Sydney, you know, it's generally a better experience. But Newcastle, Wollongong, not too bad. But yeah, once you get even out to Dubbo, spend a lot of time in Dubbo, and you know, there's parts of that large town which are not too bad in terms of access, but it's a long way off being universally accessible.
Yeah. And what about Western Sydney in your experience?
Could do better as well, certainly. I mean, it's not uncommon for people who are wheelchair users to access shopping centres, for example, to use bathroom facilities because that might be their best option. So again, the lack of spontaneity, they're having to plan every moment of your life. I think we have to try and understand that more, that the things that we take for granted are not the experience of certainly my colleagues with physical disability. So their life is odd in many ways. I don't mean that in an offensive way, but in the sense of having to plan every moment of every day. And of course, the health impact is very serious if you can't access, and I'm sure you've probably heard testimony around that, my colleagues who have physical disability, if they can't toilet regularly like everyone else does, that can have very serious health consequences. And that is dangerous when you don't have the sensations of knowing of when to go to the bathroom. So these things are actually health issues as well, which is another part of why it should be framed as a right and not just doing someone a favour or it's sort of some sort of act of kindness, I guess. The only other thing I wanted to just touch on, and my colleague has that your direct, powerful testimony has reminded me of how contested public toilets are in terms of historically and even still today. It's a highly contested public space, and we don't have to go too far into our recent history in our state of the segregation of Aboriginal people. Reflecting on the freedom rides as Catherine was talking, and a lot of that was around access to public spaces, including public toilets. So public toilets are highly contested, as you all know, highly contested public spaces, and we have further evidence of that today. And it seems that we still have a long way to go in that regard too. So, yeah.
Yeah, we seem to have this sort of issue around cost shifting will, I'm sure, be raised in terms of any proposal to cast an obligation on local government. But we also seem to have this issue about what is essential, and obviously councils do lots of things and they're all very important, but we've had some evidence earlier today of suggesting that councils are investing in lots of different things that maybe aren't as important as this. And I wonder if that rights perspective, as well as just airing these issues generally, is how to maybe change the calculus a bit, because I suppose ultimately councils are political bodies responding to what communities are saying.
If I may, I would completely agree with that sentiment, and I think that's where things need to evolve, is again that we have decision makers who understand these issues as it's not an act of kindness or doing someone a favour, it's a fundamental right. And I think framing the conversation that way would potentially evolve things. I think the other thing that we're missing here is an opportunity for employment. I really believe that there needs to be a workforce to build and maintain these facilities. And I think we're missing an opportunity to create little micro-economies in our very remote communities, especially, where, there can be people employed and I'd be very confident that community members who had that role would be valued members in community, and they would see their value in... but the role could broaden out into maintaining, footpaths and a workforce that is dedicated towards ensuring disability access. I think there's an opportunity there, and a very real one, and that's a good story in itself. And I think local councils would hopefully be attracted to that idea as well, because definitely you would know better than I do, but we hear that story all the time in regional remote parts of the state. The cost implications are very real. It is very expensive to build things in regional remote parts of the state, but there are innovative ways that we could come up with other solutions, I'm sure.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. I mean, there's large parts of most regional towns, I suspect, certainly the smaller ones, where there's not footpaths. That's not unusual at all.
That's it, yeah.
I would also tend to agree with Damien. I think employment opportunities for advisory roles, at the very least, to councils in remote areas would not only empower people from remote communities. It would also lend to a language of trust. Black Aboriginal Corporation, we're the only LGBT organisation in the plan to close the gap. We lead digital inclusion. And one of the issues when you gather information from communities is distrust, because of colonial issues and past things that have happened, there's a distrust. But when we find someone from the community that we compensate, there is a language of trust, because we're not just taking from them, we're giving back to their community. So that would, I think that's a fantastic idea.
Okay, thanks very much for that evidence. That's my questions, Chair.
Thank you. One more from me to Mr. Griffiths, particularly because you're a national organisation. Are there any other jurisdictions that do this better than New South Wales that we should look to?
Yeah, certainly Victoria. They have much higher rollout of the adult changing facilities. I think they're perhaps 3 times as many as New South Wales. Smaller state, perhaps easier to do, of course, but Victoria is certainly a standout in that provision.
Thank you, that's helpful. If there are no more questions from my colleague, perhaps in closing, is there anything that you'd like to clarify or add, or that we haven't asked about?
Fine, thank you.
No, I'm fine. Thank you very much. This has been a fantastic experience. But that's it.
All right. In that case, we'll conclude today's hearing, and thank you both so much for sharing your experience and your expertise with us today. It's a really valuable perspective for us to have heard, and the Secretary will be in touch with you if there are any supplementary questions from the committee.
No worries.
Thank you.